Good morning, Sam.
Good evening, Mallory.
Welcome back to Nobody Leaves, the podcast where we make each other watch stuff that we don't want to watch every week. We're trapped, and we're trapped with each other, and we love it.
I think so far I've not pitched anything that you wouldn't like, but you can keep up with this
I've liked
narrative
everything
that
you've pitched.
we's doing a lot of work in that statement, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's when I like describe the podcast this way, it is like just an implicit threat exclusively from my side that I've just kind of been pushing week to week, but we'll get there eventually. We'll see how you felt about this one, but I don't think I've gone full like, internet rabbit hole, just like bad content at this point yet. So yeah.
I would say we're pushing it this week, but yeah, we can get into that in a bit.
Definitely. But yeah, I did have something I wanted to talk about, which is that if anyone notices if my shelf is rearranged, any eagle-eyed viewers notice any differences, it's because there was just an earthquake where I live in Japan. Whoa. Uh-oh. That's crazy.
Bazinga.
Bazinga.
We gotta get more like shock jock radio hosts. Like we need a soundboard and just like earthquake, earthquake, Richter scale. Like, yeah.
The earthquake was pretty sus. Yeah. Anyway, here's my real bum 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 moment is okay. So
you were just in an earthquake.
Yeah, earthquake. I was out like at like a bar with some people. It was like chill there, I'm an expert. I got under a table, I was dope. If you're shaking, if you feel shaking, don't hesitate to get under a table because you're worried that people are going to think that you're overreacting or you feel embarrassed. Just get under the table. It would be better that your head doesn't get fucking crushed by something falling off of a wall. But it was all fine. But I feel like every time there's like a big shaking, there's just this dread like going home of like, okay, what's gonna be on the floor? Like what novelty mug is gonna be cracked?
Well, you do collect Fabergé eggs, so it really you kind of do it to yourself.
I truly collect mugs, and I've lost a lot of mugs. This Jungkook has survived for a while. But I've lost some good mugs like over the years.
Fallen soldiers.
But R.I.P. Gone but not forgotten. But yeah, like my shelf fell down a little bit, but that's mostly just plushies, so it was fine. However, disaster nightmare situation was my kitchen is right next to the entrance to my apartment. So like you open the door and you turn right, and it's like right there. And I open the door to go into my apartment. The lights are off. I take one step. I almost fucking slip and fall backwards on the concrete. Could you guess what happened?
All your knife collection is just like lying in the floor. Water, I'm assuming.
So much worse. I keep a bottle of olive oil right next to like the fry pans, right?
Yeah.
Or not, it was vegetable oil.
Oh,
like,
man.
Because it's like the most, like all my other spices, like everything is like up. All my sauces are away. But my olive oil, I just use it so frequently because it's right next to the like frying pan. So I just leave it out. The entire like the shoe entrance area is just slick with olive oil. The bottle is empty. And it's like it had to fall and open in a really specific way for that. Like I don't leave my vegetable oil open. Like it had to
Is the bottle like
specifically
intact but like it's uncorked?
It's I keep saying olive oil, but it's like the plastic like canola vegetable oil thing, so it's like the bottle itself is intact, but like it had to have like hit something with enough force to like remove the cap, and it's just coated. And I spent like just 10 minutes like soaking up like olive oil off the ground, wiping the fucking base of my shoes with olive oil.
That's gonna make them very slick.
Yeah, no, it was like just the most frustrating thing to spill. And like that's the casualties we don't talk about with earthquakes. It's like the other like huge earthquake I was in. Like I had some eggs on the windowsill, and then like it was like there's like broken glass and then eggs. Like that was the order, so I couldn't get to the eggs to clean the eggs up. And then I had to like evacuate, so there were just like fucking dried frozen eggs on my ground for like a
like
month
weeks.
at least.
Yeah,
or probably 2 weeks, I guess. And then you finally get there and it's like, okay, I gotta like I don't know. I brought snow in from outside because there was no running water
to melt.
Like, you can use
on the eggs.
Yeah, you can just melt snow on the eggs to get enough water to clean it without wasting your drinking water. That was a time. Yeah,
you're just living you're living the Japanese dream.
I'm living the Japanese life.
This is why every American weeb wants to move to Japan.
I did.
But the 7-Eleven culture, Mallory, it's so great. I can get little sandwiches.
Yeah, I mean, you can easily grab a little sandwich. I will say, like, on the topic of weeb culture, I thought you would really appreciate this, is the bar that I was at, this guy was, like, talking to me afterwards while I was, like, waiting to, like, make sure there wasn't going to be a tsunami to, like, that was going to, like, take me out on my bike ride home or whatever.
Right.
And he was, like, telling me about, like, the different, like, earthquake safety apps you can have downloaded. He's like, yeah, like, people recommended this one to me, and it's just, like, a Nerve app for, like the Nerve from Evangelion.
Like Evangelion like themed? It just starts, like, playing, like, piano and trumpets?
Like, the icon is exactly just Nerve, and it just gives you reports as if it's as if, like, oh, like, the Ava has hit, like, the coast or whatever, but it's a natural disaster in real life. But yeah, I have that on my phone now. Yeah, this motherfucker was, like, stepping on the ground around here.
Remember to practice earthquake safety, Mallory. Or Unit 1 will be upset with you.
If Gendo from Evangelion told you, like, evacuation instructions, would you follow them?
He is somewhat convincing.
Like, he's pretty convincing, and I feel like he says stuff in a very strong, charismatic, persuasive way, but we saw what he did. I think. I don't remember what
Maybe.
he did.
Yeah, it's hard to remember.
Maybe.
He did something?
Yeah. Who cares about Evangelion?
I certainly don't. I know that you can, like, make anything Ava in terms of merch, but, like, earthquake warning apps is a bit of a bridge too far for me. I think.
I just got another notification. It's just the Nerve logo, and it says tsunami information. The tsunami advisory has been lifted. So there we go. No tsunami.
No tsunami. You can pilot your Ava unaffected.
Yes. But yeah, do you want to talk about what happens next?
What does happen next?
Dun dun dun.
I don't know. Do I? Like, let's think about this.
Are we sure we want to talk about this?
I gotta say, this one definitely threw me for a curveball.
Yes.
So as far as the 4 we've done now, this is probably the strangest or the most, like, out of my wheelhouse, which makes sense, and I think was intentional based on how you've been messaging me over the past week. Like, how's it going? Are you reading the comic?
Okay?
You know, I'm really excited to talk about this. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah. No, this is like me putting you on like I recently saw like some clips from Squid Game where it's like, I've never watched Squid Game, but I saw like the game where they have to like jump on the glass and one of them will fall.
Yes.
Like, I'm putting you in like that kind of situation.
I'm halfway across the glass bridge, and it's like,
yeah, are we going to say the wrong thing? Are we going to...
Yes, that is one problem. I have a list of words I had to look up for this comic that I didn't understand, and like half of them are slurs that I didn't know existed.
Yes.
So I can't really read out my
yeah.
list, but I was like, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And then the
That
other
was
half is just like
honestly-
Tumblr speak I didn't understand.
That was honestly like one of the most interesting like parts of this. So to address the elephants in the room, like in words that our viewers will understand, what happens next is a webcomic that is about being transgender and gay amongst a lot of other things, but very much centered on like the protagonist is transgender and gay. Most of the like major players are transgender and gay. Like that's just a lot of what's going on.
I think every character I've met, except for like 2, are transgender.
Except like maybe Milo's dad and grandma probably are like the only ones that come to mind.
And maybe Vicky's friend, I can't remember.
Oh yeah, she is transgender and gay, but I don't think that's necessarily like stated in the first like
3 chapters.
Chapter. Yeah.
I gotcha.
That's very much the focus on it, and like I am transgender and gay and very much enjoy this, and Sam is not transgender and not gay. So
The dirty straight, yeah.
a filthy cis straight boy. So we're it's definitely like edging into that kind of territories. But yeah, that was something like immediately you sent me, like after starting reading it, like you looking up like this term which is like a slur for transgender people, that it was like so interesting, where I was like, oh, like all of this is like
implicitly
like nature knowledge to me. Yeah,
I could feel that reading the comic. I'm like, Mallory can follow this a lot easier than I can, both for good and bad reasons. Like you're more familiar with like anti-LGBT discrimination online, but you're also more familiar with like the hyper fixation aspect of it on web, like the this is a very online heavy comic. It's almost like in some ways a comic about being online.
Absolutely.
And I think of myself as pretty terminally online, but it's just a section of the internet that I'm not that familiar with, right? It's a different like part of the pool that I have never swam in.
Yeah, and I think that's like such a like common thing. It's like a niche. It's like about this area of the internet in a lot of ways, and like the type of people that there are on this area of the internet, which I love. Like a lot of the big reasons that like I love anything that's like archiving internet history, like putting a lot of spotlight on like, you know, so much like stuff that is made for the internet is like seen as like disposable in a way, or the internet culture can like move so fast, like things can get discarded so easily. But it's like, you know, like it's very much a comic that's like looking at like especially through the lens of like Milo, who is very much the protagonist, who is very much a character that's like stuck in the past in a lot of ways and is like clinging on to the past in a lot of ways, like very much
because that character has been institutionalized for multiple years. So when they get out, he's latching on to things from his childhood and like internet obsessions that have like way waned in recent years, right? Like My Little Pony as a fandom is not the juggernaut it used to be. And also just the fact that he's using Tumblr and was probably institutionalized when Tumblr had its kind of dramatic decrease in like users and whatnot. And so it's almost like anachronistic in terms of the internet. Like it's in some ways it feels like the comic is set in 2013, and in other ways it's clearly like modern day. And that is that's a fun aspect of it, I think.
Yeah, and it's compounded by like there's like a lot of use of like flashbacks and like time jumps, especially like the first 2 chapters are so short, and they are told a lot more like in this very kind of like artistic-y. It reminds me a lot of like these like I've seen a couple of these kind of like found footage-y type movies, like Unfriended or
Searching was a big one, I remember.
Searching, yes. Yeah, I was trying to remember the name of that one. Like where every single like scene of the movie takes place, like it could be on like the screen of a computer. Like the first 2 chapters are very much like giving those kinds of vibes, and it's not until the 3rd chapter that like the story kind of expands to allow like showing scenes from real life and like
right. It's definitely way more
them.
set in like the modern day, and also like what
Yeah.
people are doing in like a physical space, not a digital space, whereas the first 2 are very digital based.
Yes. And but in doing that, like it does so much like to show like, you know, like when Milo's having his modern day like interview with Vicky, it's not like a Zoom call, but then like it does like flashbacks to show him talking to like his friend Griffin, who is a murderer,
right.
on Skype.
Buried the lead there.
Like, yeah, like you know, like those are like properly shown on Skype, and there's like a real attention to detail that's like really like,
yes,
you know, capturing this is how the internet was done then, this is how it's done now, like all these kinds of things. But yeah, and
that in its own way is like character. You're getting insights into Milo as a character because of how he operates on the internet. And in part of that is what we were just talking about, where it's like it seems like he is stuck in the past in just how he interacts with people online. Like it's that read my bio before commenting kind of perspective, which people have kind of given up on. It feels like these days it's like no one's gonna. There's just the assumed
no one gives
hate.
a shit.
Yeah, exactly. It's that Tumblr style of writing of like I am the main character and like this is my domain. It's like everyone. Now, granted, my perspective is limited because I don't use Tumblr and never have, but like I have friends who have and whatnot. Tumblr to me has always felt like this is my own personal blog. This is my own personal subreddit or what have you. I'm going to try and like cater it to exactly what I want. And then people are just going to come in and ruin that as often as possible. And that feels like the Tumblr experience.
Yeah. I mean, Tumblr is definitely a very, like, I think of the like kind of like social media giants, like each of them kind of have taken on their own like personalities and their own like, you know, idiosyncrasies and stuff like over time, but like Tumblr definitely felt very unique in the way of like for the majority of the site's like time, like there really was not a lot of like the promotion of like suggested content, suggested users, like that kind of thing.
Right.
Like it was very
it's
much
very
like,
much more siloed out.
You only really find stuff from like following people that your friends follow and stuff like that, and then even then it's like there's this culture of like reblogging. Like so many people's blogs, like mine included, were just like you would have like an aesthetic blog, like someone is just reblogging like photos of like black and white pictures or whatever that like fit a certain vibe or mood or whatever, but they're not like creating any content necessarily. They're just kind of like collecting it in the way of like Pinterest or something like that in a rude way. But like I mean there definitely were people creating original content, and then it's like or just posting about their lives, which is kind of what you see Milo doing, just like ranting about stuff, but it's like there was
but it also like it seems like the format seems to add to or advocate for like fandom culture, right? In a big bad way, where it's like I'm good, like my personality is, in the case of this comic, My Little Pony or Furby or true crime, and that is very interesting as a backdrop for a drama. Not to bury the lead, but like what is this comic about? It's about someone who has been accused and convicted of helping a friend cover up a murder when they were both children, and then that person time has passed since that happened. The murderer is in jail, and the accomplice is trying to like rebuild their life, but is kind of stuck in the past, and also refuses to let go of participating in online communities, even though it's resulting in negative, like, harm to themselves, like personal harm. Like, I have to be on Tumblr no matter what, even though everyone publicly knows that I'm an accomplice to a murder.
Right. Yeah.
Which is both really believable and also just crazy.
Yeah. It's like such a insane situation and like kind of unbelievable, but at the same time it's like it's so rooted in like a lot of like stuff that has happened like on the internet with like communities like Kiwi Farms, which is like a online community that's just basically dedicated to harassing and doxing people for the most part, like functionally.
Yeah, that one broke containment. Like, I knew what Kiwi Farms was going into this, but like the more specific lingo of like insulting trans people, I was not as familiar with, and I was like, ooh, that's tough. Like, every time I was Googling terms, I'm like, well, now I want to delete my browser history because I don't even want to like search these terms.
Yeah. If you like these terms, you might enjoy it.
my shorts algorithm is suddenly just like, I don't know. It's a lot of homeschooling and Joe Rogan and I don't know.
It's very much like rooted in a lot of like these darker sides of the internet, and like just to like kind of my rant about Tumblr and like the way it's structured, like I think it really contributed to a culture of like not only like fandom but like isolation and like this weird kind of like if you know you know. Like I feel like there's so many corners of Tumblr that I never touched because like either people I knew whose blogs I followed or like stuff that I was interested in just like never were like covered certain areas, you know. Like I didn't really have any like Bernie friends, so like I didn't really get any of the like My Little Pony stuff going on like my Tumblr, you know. But like that was obviously like a huge area of Tumblr in it. It's like it feels like these whole worlds that kind of like exist within Tumblr that can just we're totally able to coexist and never touch. And like in the same way, it's like this is a very internet comic. Like there's Kiwi Farms, 4chan, like YouTube culture is like a big part of it because like kind of the catalyst for events in the story is that Vicky, who's like a trans woman YouTuber, like and like a kind of true crime content creator type of person, like does an interview with Milo that gets a lot of attention, gets him a lot more harassment and like doxing stuff going on, and shakes up his life. Like it's, I don't know, it's very interesting. I'm curious. I want to get more of what you think there.
No, certainly. It format wise, I don't love it. Like I'm not a big webcomic person in the terms of like reading a comic one panel at a time doesn't do much for me generally. I've only read like 2 or 3 over my life, and I'm like, this is just not, even though I'm such a big like manga head, like this format to me is too slow a lot of the times.
Interesting.
Rereading it again, I read it twice over the past week. And we're only covering the first 3 chapters of the 5 that are out. Yes. Because the 5th chapter is still ongoing, right? Is the idea?
Yes. Yeah, 5th chapter, I'm like, I feel like it needs to be complete before I want to touch it, and then like the 4th chapter is like I think the longest last I checked, and just like also really cool. So I'm like I would love to do this separately basically at some point, because this comic is like absolutely one of my obsessions. Like I'm checking every update. I'm so hooked on it.
No, that's fair.
For a while,
I'm excited that we're covering something that is like this small, right? Like the following of the comic, it feels like I think the highest engagement post I've seen about it was like 50,000 people. So like as far as like micro obsessions go, like this is probably the smallest thing we'll cover for a while, which I think is really exciting because it's fun to dive into something that's so content rich that people don't talk about that much. But I was also dying for some interpretations or theories, but I had to be careful because I haven't read beyond chapter 3.
Of course.
And chapter 3 ends on a very ominous note.
Yes.
But yeah, what I thought of overall for the series, right? So
yes.
Yeah, my initial impression was I'm not a big fan of the art style, and I'm not a big fan of the format, but I do really appreciate how it all feeds back into what the comic is trying to get across, which is like this idea of... This comic opens with 2 quotes. A David Foster Wallace quote, and Tails gets trolled. That kind of tells you all you need to know about this comic, right?
Yes.
Like it's very like... It has a lot of ideas, and it's kind of highbrow in how it's trying to study internet culture, but it is also mirrored in internet culture and is not afraid to go there and to get hyper-specific about My Little Pony or true crime or these internet niches that are just so... They're very interesting rabbit holes to go down, but boy, can you get lost if you're not that plugged in. Right.
Yeah.
And I think of myself as pretty plugged in, and as much as I'm like playing this up, for the most part, it was just the Tumblr blogging part that I bounced off of the most, because I'm not that familiar with how Tumblr works. But I'm very impressed with what this person has done with the limited amount of real estate they have, right? Like the amount of pages and it being like one panel per webcomic upload. Like there's not a ton of real estate to work with. And so I'm impressed that they've been able to get this many themes and story and character across in such a short format. All that being said, it moves pretty slowly.
Yeah, like I think that definitely there's like a sense of he like, I don't know, like there's definitely like a sense of limitations. Max Graves, like the author, has talked about, like he doesn't necessarily consider himself like the best or most like technically gifted artist. I do personally like the art style, but obviously but like it is also very like simply made, and like for a lot of panels, like there will be a lot of panels of like characters talking where it's like, he's clearly like trying to maximize the use of like repositioning like the same character model and like just changing the mouths so as to like limit the amount
same
of work
background,
that you have to do, so
same.
you can just,
the models don't really change or evolve very much, or they're very static.
In a way to just kind of like get the story out type of feeling, which like, I mean, solo working on a webcomic, like I think totally makes sense. Like,
No, yeah, I don't want to bully this author or this comic. Like, I think,
of course, yeah,
the tricks you do when you have those limitations, right, are all being employed here very effectively, which is like interesting framing. So like, probably my favorite style of this webcomic is when the author is using what we're doing right now, like a web call, as a frame. And it doesn't change that much, but the initial work that was put in to design Milo's room is really effective, because you have all these stuffed animals and toys like staring almost at him and then also past him at you, and it's very eerie and it works really well, even though we return to that same framing device like a lot. It is effective.
Totally. Yeah, it's like, it's definitely, there's like a sense of like limited, like you're not able to do a lot of crazy, like we're not getting like weird, wild, crazy angles of like the same face in every panel or whatever. But like, there are a lot of like really cool and smart choices that I appreciate. Like a lot of color schemes and like aesthetics that I'm really into.
Yes,
and,
that
like,
too.
Yeah, and also like the frames of like, like that look almost like screenshots, like the like unfriended searching thing we were talking about, where it's like just a computer screen, like being so faithful to the thing. It's like you can kind of get away with like basically tracing an image, but it's also like really effective in like just grounding it in the reality of like the internet in a way. Like it's people talk about like getting jump scared all the time by the comic, because it like brings up a specific like cringe niche thing that they might have been into as a teenager.
It is very true to life in the experience of reading a thread going bad on the internet. Like there's a lot of oof moments where you're like, well, I know where this is going, or like that's going to be misinterpreted 6 different ways.
Yes.
Like, don't say it like that. Don't, like.
Yeah, or like even specific stuff of like there's one which I went into kind of a rabbit hole on My Little Pony for this, just in terms of like trying to know stuff and have my bases covered. But yeah, there's a specific panel that is honestly one of my favorite panels of the comic, just because it's like doing so much with so little, but like it's just a screenshot of like Milo and Gage watching like a
The
YouTube
song
video
cover,
for
right?
a My Little Pony song called so Pinky's Bard is the like non-slurred version of the title that I've seen go around, but it's just the star bard with no slurs. and like I looked at this video exists exactly as it is depicted.
Right.
Like it's just a
I also looked it up
recreation.
to find it because of that.
Yeah. And it's just like it's I don't know, it's so emblematic of I think like focusing on like that song is so emblematic of like the comic in general. Like I almost feel like that YouTube video feels like a metaphor for Milo, of like this weird niche internet thing that's been left behind and is like problematic in this huge way that you can't ignore, because like this is a song that like is about My Little Pony, or like it's not like it's like a weird kind of like parody of My Little Pony that was created called When Friendship is Witchcraft, and it's like
which
it's
I
just,
even
like,
even
some,
that like I remember that title, like I remember that being
right.
a huge obsession. I keep saying
totally.
like broke containment, but like that bled into the rest of
Yeah.
the internet in some ways, just because it was so massively popular at the time.
Absolutely, but it's like it's a song from this thing that like it's not from My Little Pony, but it's from this thing, and it like has meaning to people, and people used to enjoy it. But in the title is the slur. The creator did not know it was a slur, and then like subsequently like removed it. But like it's like, and now you're just stuck with this thing where it's like, oh, here's a song that's like from my childhood that I really like, that the title is a slur. Like that feels like what Milo is like the human version of that, where he's like, he was accomplice to murder and he's just stuck, and like now what do you do with him? Like he's like,
I feel like
tainted in this weird way, and some people want to be rid of him, but he's a human being. Like I don't know. That's
the
my
human
take,
representation of a video that aged poorly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like that's what Milo feels like to me.
That's so sad.
To be clear, I love Milo, but yeah. It's a sad fucking comic.
It is. I think there is some tongue in cheek to it though, because like that My Little Pony song, it's not like it's called the N-word bard, right? Like it is not like it's an easy mistake to make, or not like a very extreme version
like
of
that was
that.
absolutely a word that was used casually when I was a kid, and I had no
I think that word is still used casually now, right? But
or like
the internet is like collectively trying to be better, right?
Right. And it reminds me of like when I was a kid playing, like we used to play like this game called Smear the Queer,
right?
Which like, and I'm like,
in retrospect,
I didn't.
Maybe that was never good, but yeah.
I will say I didn't really play because I didn't like getting tackled or tackling. I mostly watched my friends play it. But yeah, it's like it's just called Smear the Queer, and it's about tackling. And then you're like, huh, that's
hold on a second. Yeah,
that's a wild name to call that.
Right, but I feel like the comic is playing with that idea and that like internet sanitization, because it feels like there's a panel following like how Milo interacts with Tumblr, right? And he's apologizing for using the term sociopath in the same conversation about him helping cut off a murder victim's arms. And it's like the author knows what is it he?
Yeah, the author is
the author knows what he's doing. Like it is it's making fun of that internet way that people get, and I think Tumblr has a bad reputation for this, but I think it's everywhere on the internet. Of like virtue signaling and grandstanding about hyper specific like language while doxing someone in the same breath, right? So like Milo's critics and Vicky's co-host on the true crime podcast seem like really bad people, but they're also like they're existing within this space that is really rules based and really like moralistic while also having like zero sympathy for people. And that interplay, that humor is really like it shines through in the comic even more so on my second read. And it's like there are a couple of moments that really made me laugh really hard when I thought about it more. I think my favorite go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I have my favorite example too, so I'll hear yours first, and then I'll share mine as well.
This jumped out to me really hard the second time I read it, which is I think it's how you're introduced to Milo, or at least Milo's Tumblr, is his before you follow.
We have the same favorite.
Okay, excellent. It's the fact that the before you follow has like 3 hyper internet specific rules that are about like language and pronouns and a lot of terms I had to Google. And then the 4th one is also I was involved in a murder. Don't ask me about it. But that comes 4th. Like the fact that it's ordered, it's deprioritized is really funny. It's like Milo is like trying to hide it, but also maybe considers those other 3 things more important. Like it is a great piece of character writing. And it is so cringe and it is so embarrassing, but it is incredible.
Yeah. It is your introduction to Milo. It's in the first chapter, which is Dog Names, which is like the original comic that kind of went a little viral, which is like just like, you know, before you follow, like, don't follow if you're against neopronouns. Don't follow if you're like, you know, like pro like problematic ships. Like you're pro,
one of the terms I had to look up was map and no map, which is like a sanitized version of talking about pedophilia, and I was like, all right.
Right. Yeah, that was like a, you know, wave of people on Tumblr who were like trying to have their own little LGBT flags for like pedophiles or whatever. Like
that's a lot.
Do the whole thing, right? And like you know, like you're clarifying all these things. Like, do not ask me about like, do not follow me if you think that I was involved in the events of the murder of like Savannah Plunkett. Do not follow me if you think I was responsible for the death of Haley Korsky or Savannah Plunkett. It's just like, I don't know. It's like
it's a really good piece of character writing. Like it's hysterical.
It's so good. Yeah, it's really, really nice. I think I was reflecting a lot on like, why do I love this comic so much? Why am I so obsessed with it? I think there's a lot of like reasons. But I think one of them, like, I think because I was also just like reflecting on it and thinking about like, what is this about? Like, what is this comic really like getting to? Like, and I think that like the theme that resonates the most with me is like justice. I think that it really is a comic about justice in a lot of ways of like, what is justice? What does justice look like? You know, as part of my like preparation for this episode, I watched like this interview. I got a month Nebula subscription to watch an interview with Max. I forked out $6 because I had wanted to watch this interview for a long time, and I'm just so obsessed with this comic. I'm like, I want to hear anything the author has to say, right? So I'm like,
one day we'll be there really on Nebula, like right next to it.
Yeah,
nobody leaves.
Watch this spot. But I got the subscription because I wanted to check out the interview, and like, you know, he's talking a lot about like the themes about like prison abolition and like mutual aid and stuff. Like he is someone who like politically is for the abolition of prisons. Like I would say that I am as well, but it's like, what does that look like? And like, what does that look like for someone like Milo? And he talks about like Milo, like being like a unlikable generally person. And then it's like, well, whose fault is that? Like he was in a like mental institution for like his like 5 years for like his formative, like he didn't go to high school, he doesn't have high school diploma, and like there's an extent to which like you have to help yourself, and I think a lot of what's really hard makes it really hard to like fully like get behind Milo and sympathize with him is like his kind of like pathetic just kind of flopping over in a lot of situations. Like he's just like not really seeming willing to like work to like become a better person or change in a lot of ways, and he's really like holding on to the past. But like he also has no friends. He's clearly not close with his family. Like there's really like no one he can rely on. Like honestly, like rereading it, I felt like his biggest light was maybe his friendship with Vicky, but then she's also someone who kind of basically exploits his trauma for like YouTube clicks and doesn't take down the video, you know. And it's like it's he's in such a tough situation constantly that it's like it's hard to blame him for being so like, you know, he's always on edge, obviously. Like he's always desperate, he's always like just kind of, you feel him just flailing a lot of the time, like because like what is he supposed to do, like, you know.
Well, and then like it's really understanding, even though it's a horrible idea, like that he wants to hold on to an internet presence, right? Like when his family, who are not of his generation in many different ways, like they don't accept his identity, and they don't understand why he would throw himself into the court of public opinion or like the internet town square. But it's all he has is this internet fandom culture. Like he has no real life friends, he has no ambitions or goals, and so what do you do when you're in that situation? Like you turn to the internet, right?
And I think that's like what one of the things of like him being his position being so fragile, like is the like trans thing. Like I think. And, like, something that's, like, really cool about this comic is it's, like, it feels like it's about being trans and gay when, like, overt discrimination isn't, like, necessarily always referenced in a lot of ways.
Yes,
it's, like,
it only happened, like, something that's, like, an obvious discrimination only happens, like, 3 or 4 times in the 3 chapters I read.
Yeah.
Like, it's mostly coming from his family, but even then, they're not shouting at him for how he dresses or acts or the name he chooses to use, but there's like that underbelly of we don't understand you and we can't sympathize with you, right?
But then I think something that like, and like to why I think that like justice or like morality, I guess, is like feels like such a strong theme at the core of it is like I feel like what this comic is really, really, really good at doing is like there are just all these like moments where something happens where you're like, that's bad. Like that's like you're like that's kind of like a bad situation.
A lot of oof,
but it's so good at like
reading.
Yeah, a lot of oof moments, but it gives you so many like layers to each moment where you're like, can you blame this person for, like, you understand, like, can you blame this person for this? Can you blame this person for this? So it's like in the scenes where like his dad or grandma are calling him by his dead name, it's like it's not really clear, like, did he come out to them? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it's
well, and I think
like
in,
did he tell
in
them
that
to
scenario,
refer? But then
the dad definitely comes across as worse, but the grandmother moments hit me even harder because that turn to religion is such a common, like, I'm trying to meet you, but there's just this divide that will not, like, this is not, my methods are not going to work, right? Like, we are, you and I in real life, and Milo the character are in a generation where religion is under emphasized or valued, right? So when someone from an older generation tries to connect to you using religion, which from Milo's perspective, I'm sure is A, like worthless to him, and B, not useful in the sense that, like, I think a lot of people our age or his age or on the online generation, right, when they think of religion, a lot of times they think of religion as a tool for discrimination, right? They think of like the anti-gay movement or the anti-trans movement because it, like, those ideas have been corrupted. And so we as a generation aren't terribly spiritual, or if we are, it's almost like we've replaced religion with the internet, right? Like that is our church. Tumblr is Milo's congregation and church or what have you. But the grandmother not getting any of that, just being so much older and not understanding like trans identity or why someone would put themselves on the internet after being an accomplice to a murder. Like it's very understandable, but it's also like, oh, this is just not, these two characters are not going to be able to see eye to eye, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, you're like, because you can kind of like theorize that like did Milo come out to his grandmother like, and like you can't necessarily blame her for dead naming him if she doesn't know that he's trans, but like also like, you know, there's stuff about her that he might assume that she wouldn't like take that news very well or be very curious about it.
Right. Me as a reader,
which does kind of fall, and then it's like, but then she could be curious, you know what I mean? Like he's clearly like growing facial hair, like you know, like he is clearly presenting in a certain way. Like she could be curious, and she seems to be like to just kind of like let him be and not really talk to him a lot in the house, you know, like not really make a real effort to connect to him in a lot of ways, which seems, you know, she could throw him a lifeline and have him have some sort of social action, but instead he's playing Monopoly by himself in his room with his Miffy plush, you know, like
that's very sad. Yeah, I think the only panel I can think of where they're not arguing but they're together, I think she is doing a Sudoku puzzle like at the kitchen table, and he's not speaking to her, like making a sandwich, and it's like, yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. Like this is the closest you feel like they're getting, and it's like, is it her fault for not reaching out? Is it his fault for not reaching out? You know what I mean? Like, did he rebuff her enough to where she gave up? Or it's
right. And there's also the underlying, he was an accomplice to a murder. So like, there's so much more on top of that. Like maybe they could have had a better relationship.
Yeah.
Had that not occurred. But also there's underlying like the fact that he was homeschooled and was specifically in that like hyper homeschool focused society. I think unschooling, I think is the term that was used in the comic.
Yeah.
Which is like an internet label for that style of homeschool treatment. That implies a lot without telling you one way or the other, right? Like that would, to me, that would indicate a more likelihood of like going in the direction of like conversion camps or just hyper religion or what have you, but we don't know. Like it's left ambiguous, and I think that in its own way is like, it's fun to theory craft and it's interesting.
Yeah. And it's I think that like I think that like what this comic like does to my brain, because like I think I'm just someone who like naturally really gravitates towards trying to like, I don't know if make moral judgments is the right word, but like a little bit, but like trying to like, how do I feel morally about like what I'm consuming? Like that is kind of the way that I engage a lot with like media. Like I'm like, do I agree with what's going on? Like my brain just like really easily goes there. And I think what this comic does to me is just like, you can just go in circles about like so many interactions, and it just keeps hitting you with these kinds of like morally ambiguous interactions. And like it kind of is like one thing that the creator has said like pretty frequently in like response to like questions about the comic is that he like tries not to make moral judgments about characters and just tries to like show them in a lot of ways in the comic, like just trying to like depict events like in a way that's like as true to life as he can without like coming down too hard on like any specific individual. And it's like, you know, it kind of, I feel like wound my brain out to a certain point to where it just like stopped trying to like decide who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. And I think that's like healthier in a lot of ways. Like, and I think like also as a character, like you can see like why, at least for me, like I can really see why Milo is like so drawn to being like apologizing for using the word sociopath, because it could negatively affect like, you know, people part of the, oh my god, is it ASD? Shit. No, that's autism spectrum disorder. ASP, never mind. Antisocial personality community. ASP,
Right.
maybe. That's also, ASP is also a snake, is an asp. But anyway, like, I was like, sorry for offending the sociopathic community, and then like he's so drawn to like being really like, you know, like I think it's a really significant detail that he's against like problematic ships, which is like that can be like a huge discoursey thing. Like some people will get very into ships that like involve like, you know, abuse or
domination
like,
and whatnot. Yeah,
or domination, and like that's, they're drawn to it for whatever reason, and like him being part of the community that's like very against that, like it makes sense to me that why he's like so drawn to like trying to like dissect with tweezers all these like things and like come down morally correctly on like every single issue. It's like because he has this huge traumatic event in his past, and it like dissecting like who is right or wrong in that situation is like very relevant, and it's like very important for him and his mental stability, I think, to be like, I didn't do anything wrong in a way, or like
all
I
he
didn't
wants
murder
is
a
someone to
person.
tell him that he is not at fault.
Exactly. And yeah, like, so I think that draws him to consistently really try and be like morally on the right in everything, you know? Like it's almost like projecting these impotent feelings, because when he tries to fight people about like the murder accomplice things, like they make a lot of good points against him that, you know, it's like it's really hard to like refute. So it's, you know, I think I was like very like why people get like that, because I think it's like, you know, like people go on and on about like the woke left and moral outrage culture and like canceling and all this kind of stuff, and it's like there is like a grain of truth of like there are a lot of people online who are like very, very like can be very morally absolute and very quick to condemn and very like invest a lot of time and energy to like making distinctions, that making sure that they're like morally in the right or whatever. And it's like it's really cool to see a comic be like, this is why someone might be like this, and this is what their life like looks like when they're not using the internet. Is like fucking nothing is happening,
a nightmare
at all.
Yeah
it is,
like, it's I don't think the comic is
Etsy customs and going to bed, like, you know.
I don't think the comic is unsympathetic to those people, but it is definitely not uncritical, right? Like there is no like you said, there's no good and bad character in this. It's just this is how people get like this, and they are, you can have sympathy for these people, but also at the same time be critical of like I said earlier, like that hypocrisy is very present in this comic throughout. I think this comic is really purposeful with a lot of what it is doing, right? And maybe I'm giving the author too much credit, but like setting the comic with the backdrop of true crime is great, because that's like a microcosm of this whole conversation about morals and ethics and exploitation. Like when anyone who participates as a true crime creator, it is a unsettled debate on the internet about how much they are encouraging repeat offenses, like encouraging violence or glorifying violence, or leading to the more extreme and problematic reactions to that sort of thing, like people glorifying serial killers or falling in love with them from afar or whatnot. And Vicky is like the perfect character for that, where she acknowledges like the more negative directions that goes. Like they have a conversation about people falling in love with serial killers while on a podcast or a YouTube show about true crime, right? And it's like that ambiguity is, you can apply that whole scenario or that whole industry, the true crime industry, to the rest of this comic, and it is its own parallel or metaphor to each other, and like that is all like great. Like that is this comic has the sauce. There's stuff going on in it. I just don't always
Yeah.
love the delivery, but like it is cooking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely like it is layered, and I do think it's like I think, especially having read 2 more chapters of it, like I think it is fair to give like Max Graves flowers for like the depth and like the layering he does with like all these different communities and themes. Like he is really touching on and like building all these stuff, and like yeah, true crime, like as you said, is such a like good thing to kind of like set everything in, like like we're kind of like dissecting the like corpse of this thing that happened like 5 years ago that maybe we should touch and like not mess with because like the real people get affected by it, but
Right. And like the way you have to
like-
sell any online product, like any YouTube video, any title, any thumbnail, is like so direct and specific and accusatory, or like a judgment has been made before like the thing even exists, right? Like there might be some nuance in Vicky's podcast that we're not really seeing, or that we see a little bit here and there, but the title's going to be like committing a crime and getting caught cutting a person's arm off. Like it's gonna be twisted into being like a very binary this or that. And
absolutely,
it being a comic about the reaction to a murder and what happens next, and every single person has an opinion on Milo, that is like set in stone, right? Like every like anonymous commenter we see is making a snap judgment. This person's a murderer. This person deserves to be in jail, what have you. And it's a fascinating thing to have happen in a comic about nuance, right? This is a comic about nuance, whereas the internet does not do nuance well, or at all.
And like also shows the way that like discriminations like really play into it, like it's like so many of those snap judgments are informed by the fact that like Milo is trans, like there's so many,
they're
like,
informed by transphobia,
or like even like fat phobia cutting in there. Like there's just so many immediately like judgments about like this, that, and the other, and like like there's kind of this like underlying thing where like there's kind of this like weird school of thought of like the anti-trans crowd that is like the evidence against trans ideology is like, look at how miserable trans people are. Like that's kind of like a not uncommon thing that is like kind of like trumpeted by those kinds of people, and it's like,
or it's like, my mind in Christ, you're holding the
about...
bat. It's like trans people keep getting hit by bats in the head, and it's like guy holding the bat being
why do so many trans
happening?
people have dented heads? Like,
exactly.
Like... No, I mean absolutely, but I think the comics like does not shy away from like just ugly stuff. Like there are so many parts where it's like, oh, you're doing it to yourself, man, but it's like, but is all of this is like being informed by you being raised in an environment like just swimming in discrimination. And like there's something else I was thinking about in the comic was like, I feel like there's kind of like this horror suspense element to it.
Yes, like, especially in the third chapter, which we haven't talked a ton about.
I do want to get into Gage because this will be a transition, but I think the other horror thing other than Gage is the like suspense element of like at least well, I'm curious like how if you feel the same thing. To me, I feel like there's kind of this day-to-day horror, and it like comes and goes in waves of like, am I gonna get misgendered? Basically, that's like I know you don't have that necessarily, but like that's like a day-to-day thing that I live with, kind of, where it's like it comes and goes. Like if I'm going to a place where I know the people, generally I'm not very concerned. If I'm like buying something at the convenience store, generally I don't really give a shit. But like, there is, it will spike in certain areas where it's like, okay, I'm going to this kind of environment. How are these people going to be? Are they going to be weirded out? How are they going to read me? Like, am I going to have to explain my identity? Like, I hate explaining my identity. Like, I generally just try to let people treat me how they're going to treat me. Like, I don't really like to, come out with stuff unless I'm like trust the person. But like, I think that this comic very much has that element too of like, and I think especially for someone who's like trans and gay, like I think that being trans and gay is like such a, there's this weird kind of like instability to that existence. There's like that whole kind of like straight with extra steps thing. It's like you feel like you're on thin ice, like of like someone just being like, you're not really trans, or you're like this, you're that, like that kind of constant threat that does just kind of feel like it's like looming. Because I feel like there's areas where transphobia is very clearly shown, and then there's areas where you're like, is it gonna pounce? You know what I mean? Like it's just,
right. Is this person gonna turn on me? Kind
There's
of
this
feeling.
dread.
Yeah.
Right. And then it comes with like Vicky being like, Vicky ends up being the one who like knows Milo's identity and is the one that calls him like a sad crying blonde girl in that like, heated moment where you're like, that is like a blink and you miss it moment. I don't know if you caught that necessarily.
Are you sure
like
that's in the first 3 chapters?
It's when he blocks her. It is.
I thought the co-host misgendered him.
I think
because Vicky
the
stands up.
Xandra, the blonde. Yeah, Vicky stands up for him in their one-on-one conversations.
Yeah.
And Xandra makes fun of him like, oh, he's gonna put stars in your name, which is really funny.
Does Vicky do it in a comment on Tumblr?
No, Vicky does it. They're having a
in
conversation. So like Milo calls her. She's like at a funeral, and he's like being like, "You think I'm stupid?" And she's like, "Like I'm not gonna answer. Like, do you think I'm stupid?" And she's like, "I'm not gonna answer a question.
I'm not gonna
like
respond to
that
that question." Yeah, I remember that scene.
Which good boundary setting. It comes after that. Like they have a conversation where he's asking her to take the video down, and she's like refusing, and they like things start getting heated, and they start being more critical of each other. And she says like, like whatever, like you can just be like a sad, like she highlights like a big reason why you're not in jail and Griffin is like not to do with like whether you were a murderer or not, but it's to do with like
that you weren't out as a trans person at the time.
Yeah, Griffin was out as a trans man, and Griffin's parents are like, kind of hippies or whatever, like didn't necessarily have a lot of money. Your parents are like a college professor and a lawyer, and like you were a blonde girl that could cry and say that you're pressured into it by a trans person, and that's how you got out of it, which is totally valid. But she delivers it in a way that comes off like she's misgender, or I mean, I say comes off like pretty much she is just like
misgendering Milo,
crying
right.
little blonde girl. And it's like, yeah, like the fact that it comes from the other trans gay person, you're like, fuck, you know what I mean? And it's like,
see, that is something that like me being a dirty straight, I don't like see it. I like though I'm looking for it as I'm reading, and even still I'm missing it. Right, like it's just not what I'm tuned into. As much as like I need the more obvious examples, like the dad.
Right, yeah. Like he feels like the person, and like yes, he does dead name Milo, but it's just to me, I'm not sold that Milo has come out to his dad at any point. I do think that his dad probably is pretty aware and is deliberately looking away from things. Like Milo's clearly getting reported on in the news. Milo clearly has facial hair and like his dressing and cutting his hair a certain way, but like, yeah, like the fact that Vicky's the one who is like. But like
yeah, that totally like recontextualizes that character to me, where like for a while it's like this character seems like they have their head on straight the most, like I'm kind of latching on to
She's
the
definitely
voice of reason
on the better side, I think, and she does apologize for it. It was a heated gamer moment, but it's not good. Like obviously,
we've all been there.
like,
we've all been on a bridge in PUBG when words just come out that you would never say otherwise, and
yeah, no, but like it's also so telling. Like that's the thing. Like the thing that she does to him that like most people would look as like being objectively harmful is like she posts this video of him and like refuses to take it down, which leads to him getting doxxed and like losing his housing. Right? Like that's the thing you would most people would point to and be like, oh, this is the reason that Milo would dislike Vicky. But like the reason that he blocks her and then screams into a pillow is like because she misgenders him,
Right.
which is, I mean, it is a big deal, like, but it's also like, you know, it was a heated. I want them to be friends. Like I feel
that's like the dread.
It's very tragic that they're not. Yeah.
Yeah. The dread of chapter 3 is Milo is so isolated, cut off from family, cut off from Vicky, who seems like mostly a voice of reason or at least a sympathetic ear at times, and that's perfect opportunity for Gage to just sneak in there. And I think maybe the most scary panel in this whole thing, like worse than the murder scenes, is Gage commenting on a post from chapter 1 in chapter 3, and you know that means he's going back in time and like reading through Milo's timeline. That is such a, you only know this if you've been on social media for 10 years, but it's like, oh, he's scrolling far and like responding to stuff that's months old at this point. This guy's bad. Like at that, I was immediately on the track of like, all right, Gage is bad. It's bad news. And so then when Milo is like living with him, it's like, this is gonna be really bad.
It's so like Gage is like just the embodiment of a red flag. And one thing, like I've read this in like a lot of different formats where you could like see comments like Max Rave, he posts the comic on Twitter still regularly, so you get like replies there, and like also on the website there's like comments and stuff. Which
I read some of the website comics. They were very helpful when trying to like follow along.
Yeah, some of them can be like really good at contextualizing and like pointing out like minor I love one detail that I got from there that I think is like clearly very intentional and like very like they show like Gage just never eating, like he doesn't have food in his house. Like they go to like a Denny's and he just has like a like cup of tea or whatever, like, you know, like there's like his pantry is like 2 carrots, like, you know, like
he's got the spooky like pit vipers, like he's like a demon, like he's like so scary in terms of like the yellow eyes and the
and his dirty bong. Every comment was talking about his bong being like so gross, which I've never smoked a bong because, like Milo, I've never had an opportunity to do anything cool. So, like, you know, when people were, like, pointing out, like, Gage, please clean your bong, like, it's like, man, this is
the
just
burnout
the
stoner who works at Domino's and has no prospects and therefore becomes obsessed with, like, a controversial internet subculture. Like, that also rings really true. Right.
Yeah. Very, very borderline personality coded, like behaviors going on, like very like, you know, clearly sets up another thing that I really like. There's like a shot that like shows, because here's the thing is like Gage is set up to be this walking red flag. There's this constant dread around him, and he does do bad things in the comic. Like, don't get me wrong, but like, then there's this scene where he's talking to Milo about like his ex, and he's like, yeah, like my ex dumped me and like all my old friends took his side and like they're all assholes, and you're immediately like, oh, of course Gage would say something like that. Like he's a very like, you know, resentful kind of unstable kind of person.
You've met people who
but then you're
or play the victim when they're not, right? But yeah,
totally, yeah. But then he starts talking about the specifics of what happened. You're like, whoa, holy shit, like it's like, yeah, he like tried to shoot me and like
right, with an airsoft gun,
stole my stuff, and he's his like ex-boyfriend is like depicted as wearing like this what's it called, $1 Million Extreme t-shirt, which is like huge red flag. That's is
that like hardcore band or something?
Hardcore red, like the guy who does it is just the guy who made that show, which was like a shortly ran Adult Swim show that was canceled, is like right-wing / insane person type stuff. Like is the type of person that's like posting videos that are getting banned from every platform. Like,
gotcha.
You know, it's someone wearing a t-shirt like that. It's like, okay, you're like idolizing like a kind of like type of person that is like like this is the type of person who's like, yo, rape is awesome. Like that's
Right.
the type of person, you know what I mean? Like celebratory,
Edgelord,
like, just evil, masculinity.
dangerous.
Yeah, edgelord. Yeah, that's probably the best word. And but then there's this panel that shows him and like this other friend that like vaguely kind of resembles Milo.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start putting the pieces together. It's like, because Milo was in this triangle with like, it's like Griffin, who was the murderer, Haley was the person who was murdered, and then Milo is implied to have had like feelings for Griffin and been somewhat jealous towards like,
yes, there's
Haley,
there's
the
a love
person who was
triangle
murdered.
vibe. I think they show the cosplay photo, and then right after they show them the three of them on the couch, and like Griffin and the victim
Yeah.
are getting kind of buddy, where Milo's now like
Yes.
off to the side.
Right. So there's like this weird dynamic where Milo's the jealous third wheel, and then you're like looking at like this situation, and it's like you can almost recreate that triangle with like this toxic ex who's like very like aggressive, like is filling the spot of Griffin, and then like this person like could potentially fill the spot of Milo, which would put Gage in the spot of Haley. So then you're like, oh, is Gage like just trying to recreate this triangle with like new people in a way that like he has like more control in the situation? You know what I mean? Like,
And he's
that was
obsessed
a theory
with,
that I saw that I really liked.
like from his
Griffin.
social media posts, he's obsessed with like, you want to love someone to the point where there are no boundaries. Like he's obsessed with like the
All the
criminality
boundaries
aspect
are
of
dissolved.
it. It's like, oh, oh no,
Oh.
not good.
You
I
don't
do,
have to ask for consent because you just want the same thing all the time. Isn't it so great?
I know you know more than me because you've read chapters 4 and 5.
Of course.
But
Mhm.
I like in chapter 3, they're playing with the idea of culpability with Milo a little more. And there's almost an implication that maybe Milo is more involved in the murder or in, like,
Right.
I don't think the comic ever needs to answer that question. I think it's just nice to have
Yes.
a hanging, like, leave
Yeah,
it in,
you don't know
ambiguous
how
enough.
mad to be at him because you don't know how culpable he was. Like, it
Right.
seems like he sawed her arm off. I think that's like the most.
That's the most we know for sure, right?
Yeah, which sucks.
Not
But
good.
It's like, which is crazy. But it's just like, I don't even know if it's clear if like Milo was the one that like squealed to police or not. Like it's just like it is left so ambiguous, and then there is the thing where like, you know, he kind of has a motive of being jealous of Haley. However, most like
Right. When they record
15-year-olds
that
don't
ukulele
result to
song
murder.
together, it seems like he had feelings
They
for
had a
her. It
friendship.
seems to be like very much the implication.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's just such a like messy situation. But yeah, no, I agree that like it being left ambiguous is definitely a strong point.
I feel like it might weaken this comic's overall messaging if chapter 10 or whatever, like 10 years from now, it's like, and Milo was actually the murderer the whole time. Like, I don't think it needs that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
not necessarily
hate
that far,
it. It
but-
could be done well, but I think that it's interesting that
Yeah.
it's not. We're not given all the answers, and that goes back into the
think-
themes we've been talking about and circling
Yeah.
around of like judgment and morality and whatnot.
I will say that I think the probably biggest argument against that, just through implication, is that Griffin did murder someone before.
Yes.
Like there was a second victim that he murdered before he murdered Haley, who was his girlfriend. So it seems like Griffin was definitely like the one taking the lead on like being a violent person. And I also think there's like that another iconic panel, which is the trauma core like picture of like Kuromi and My Melody with like Kuromi holding the knife, and it says like, "I trusted you."
Yes.
Like it does imply a level of like betrayal on Milo's part. Like my best guess is that I think Milo, like we see him just kind of having this very like subservient, like he just does whatever Griffin tells him to do type of like mentality, and it feels like he failed the the psychology experiment where they like the like
Oh,
like,
Milgram
execution
experiment
chair
or whatever,
thing
where
where
it's
they're-
like the person's
Yeah,
being
where
shocked
they're
and like
like-
stop, like you can exit the
Yeah.
program at any time, but then they keep shocking the person.
it's like you're following orders to like do a bad thing. Like it feels like he just failed that test basically. That's my take on it at least. But yeah, it's obviously intentionally left more ambiguous than that. But
there's a really good ambiguous panel where it's like it's kind of giving you some recap in the chapter 1 or 2 of what happened, and then it just cuts to Milo still presenting as a woman, like back in the past, or as a girl.
Yeah.
On the stand on trial, and you don't get to see what he's saying, right?
Right.
So it's not. It gives the implication that he's been recapping what happened, but it's ambiguous, and that's interesting. Like it feels like a betrayal, Milo betraying Griffin, but you don't get any more than that. Like you're just left to like make a lot of assumptions about it.
Yeah, and I will also say, like, in terms of, like, because so many characters are painted as morally gray, like, Vicky seems like mostly probably a good person for Milo, but then does, like, several notable questionable things, and then Gage seems like this walking red flag, but then you see, like, his traumatic past. Like, I think the implication with Gage, it feels like he was, like, surrounded by the worst people ever and just thinks that's normal to, like, just not have any boundaries, you know? But then, like, I feel like the two characters who, like, and it hasn't really changed that much. Like, I will say, I think chapters 4 and 5, like, they really follow, like, different characters, in a way that, like, we still don't really have a continuation to the cliffhangers of chapter 3 at all, which is, I like, personally, because it feels a lot more of, like, we're reflecting on characters rather than focusing too much on, like, the, like, resolving narratives in a way. Yeah, like but like yeah, like I feel like the only characters that to my image, like I've only really seen like this character depicted as good or bad is like Griffin and Haley, Griffin being the like murderer and Haley being the victim. Like I don't recall any time I've seen Griffin depicted in a like positive or sympathetic light, and I don't recall any time I've seen Haley depicted in a negative light. But like from everything we've seen, it's like my instinct is to doubt that
there's
I'm
more
not blaming
there,
Haley
right?
for being murdered, but I'm like surely there's gonna be more like stuff that gets. So I think that's like the thing that I am most interested in, like eventually finding out about is like Griffin's deal. You know, like his situation. I think is. I don't know.
He's a character without a voice, right? Because he's not online because he's in jail.
Yes.
And so the only bits you get are from Gage, who's completely unreliable, and you get one panel of Milo shot from the back talking to Griffin in prison. Yeah, and there's a reference to Milo visiting Griffin like throughout the last few years, but we've never been shown one of those scenes, and it's like that in its own way is like fascinating. Like what is being held back? Yeah, like what is the fact that Milo goes and talks to him, you know what I mean? And it's like, how does he feel about Griffin? Sometimes, you know, like there's the I trusted you panel, obviously, and the like clearly blaming Griffin for what happened, but then like he's still going to see him, like he seems like, clearly upset about Gage,
seems to have
like
feelings
about them being in a relationship.
Yeah, like there's clear jealousy. He clearly had feelings at you know, and like it's a mess. But I think one thing like that I also really like is and this is an insight. We said before we started the podcast we were going to talk about how we like. You said you were going to talk about how the situation you read it, and I said I was going to talk about how I first found it.
Yeah, I want to know. I want to know how you like found this comic to begin with. Like that's something I want to cover before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I love getting into it like right at the end. But yeah,
yes.
I initially found it. There's a YouTuber that I follow and really enjoy called Lily Alexander, who's like a trans YouTuber. Who I'm very fond of her content, and she retweeted it on Twitter like I think about a year and a half ago is when she first did it, and I was just started reading and was like hooked since and then she later did a video essay that like featured a lot of like her kind of like commentary and takes on the comic were like incorporated into her like larger general message. And then it was an extended interview she did with like the creator that is what I was subscribing to Nebula to view. Like she's the Nebula creator. Yeah, like she was talking a lot about like, you know, transition regret. Like she does a lot of like talking about like you know, a lot of like philosophy kind of like thought provoking stuff about like trans people aging and like what is it to transition, like a lot of these kind of things, and like talking about like transition regret and trying to make place for like stuff like that. And I think something she kind of like guided me. I don't know if she phrased it exactly like this, but like where I am, I think, is informed from that video, and like kind of my thinking on this is like what happens next, like it's simultaneously like not a story, like it never shows the murder or the events, like the traumatic events, and it also never shows there are no characters in the story that are ever shown like struggling with gender identity or discovering their gender identity or coming out. Like it always is like really showing the characters like after they've transitioned, and it'll show flashbacks, and it's like very like it does not shy away from depicting like, you know, trans male characters like presenting very feminine before they transitioned. Later chapters show the opposite with trans female characters presenting very masculine before they transition. Like it doesn't shy away from like those messy pasts in a way. And it's like, you know, like what happens next can be like, well, what happens after this traumatic murder event happened, and also like what happens after your transition, you know what I mean? Like this, you have this narrative, and like so much trans media and like LGBT media in general is about like the kind of coming of age, coming out, like, you know, realizing arc, and that's like a cool narrative, and it feels cool to like post about coming out and get a bunch of likes on like Twitter or whatever, but like, and then you just keep living, you know. And it's like
well, and it's also like to certain sects of the internet, someone coming out as trans or transitioning is treated like a murder, right? And then yeah exactly. And like, but also just like bad people or people who are like unaccepting of transitioning in general, right? Like in society will like treat it as like a suicide without a death or what have you, where it's like they can be I
lost my child, they died,
exactly, that mentality. And so it's that ties into this comic in ways that I think people could draw, and that feels intentionality is like the word of the day for me with this comic. It's like everything feels very intentional for what at first appears like an amateur, like just for fun comic, right? The more you peel it back, the more interesting it is.
Yeah, it's pulling so much together, and then you're like, oh, this is like working. Like this is really
it's humming.
Means something together. Yeah.
It's
humming.
Yeah, I use humming a lot. I don't hear people use that term very often, but like it's just that feeling of like
a car, like a machine, like it's going.
Yes, like the engine's running, it's got an energy to it, and I think that's very good. I'm talking myself up higher in the tier list as we've been talking.
I'm persuading you to love this comic as much as I do. Yes. I will say, like, the addressing, because we're winding down, like addressing the tier, I feel like after pitching this comic to you, the more I start to be like, I wonder if we need tiers on this pod, because I'm like, how could I tier this? Yes. But you can. It's fair to me. I'm like,
the fun part of it, right, is that I'm tiering something you love, not you tiering it yourself, right? Like, I assume this is an S or an A for you. I don't get
control over. Yeah, like this is absolutely like, I've joined the Discord that he has.
Then you know you're in. Yeah.
I get notifications every time he posts a new panel, and even if I'm at work in between like classes, I'm clicking on that panel because I gotta know what happens next. You know, like It also does have the feeling of like a car crash that you can't look away type of thing sometimes.
Very much so.
Oh god, it keeps getting worse. It keeps,
Well, yeah. Quick anecdote about reading it.
Yes.
I read it.
Yes. And then we can.
I read it immediately after our last podcast recording because I was like, let me wind it back. Immediately after our last podcast recording, I was supposed to take my cat to the vet, and I discovered that my cat is scared of the vet because this is her second time going. Technically her third time because I had to put her under medication. I took her to the vet. She was too scared. They couldn't do anything with her. I medicated her, took her a second time. All that went well, and she's getting treated for allergies. Third time, she's now been to the vet and been treated as opposed to just going and coming back home. So I discovered that she is scared of her carrier because she knows what it means, which caught me off guard. And I spent, I kid you not, like an hour and 10 minutes trying to get this cat into a carrier. And I live alone, and I'm a single person, so it's really hard to corner a cat, even on medication, because they turn into liquid. So what I've been telling my friends is I got in a fight with my cat, which is the truth, because I was just very mad at her. She's currently climbing on the table as we're recording because she's upset with me because she's about to go to the vet again because I had to reschedule.
She's threatening to hit the stop recording button at any moment.
I was so mad. I was like, I had to cancel the vet, and I had to call them and be like, yeah, I can't, this simple creature has defeated me. And I was just mad.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at her mad, and I'm like, I really want you to go to the vet so I can get this issue addressed. And I was like, it's one of those times where you're so frustrated, you're like, I'm just gonna take a nap. Like, fuck this.
Yeah.
And I took a nap, and then I was like, well, I guess I'll read this comic. And I sat in bed all day reading the comic, like mad at my cat. And that was just like, that's how I consumed the comic.
Now that your anecdote got interrupted, I can show off my Milo cosplay. That's like, it's soft Milo. That's what I'm going for.
Excellent.
Like the primary colors.
You got the clip.
Like, I this is the most money I've spent on a costume for this podcast, which is any money at all. I went to the dollar store and I got like I was
clip.
like, I don't have childish enough hair clips basically, so I was like, okay, I need like the basic baby colors, like, you know,
Excellent.
kidcore, like,
yes,
trauma response outfit basically. So that's this episode.
Excellent.
But yeah, what did you think of what happens next?
Despite my misgivings about the format and not jiving with the art style too much, it is a very impressive comic that I am liking the more we are talking about it. I definitely want to read chapters 4 and 5, and it was difficult not to over the past week. I'm in a bit of a bind here where I can't say it's better than Undertale.
You can.
I don't. I feel that's wrong in my heart, right? Like, I don't feel like it's better than Undertale is what I mean.
Okay.
It is definitely
not that you're worried about Undertale fans descending on you because you like the webcomic more than Undertale.
That is a secondary fear. But yeah, so it's going to be a C for me, but it is a strong C. Like, it is top of C for now. I'm already wanting to redo everything, and I've only got 2 entries on the board, so that's great.
Me too. I regret Solonin already in my ranking.
What did you put it as? Was it D or C?
I think mid-tier, like cute C, because I think that, yeah, it was just like, I'm not like wilding about it, but I appreciate you like reading it like right afterwards and then before, because like I was kind of like, oh, I should like read this like right before we do the podcast to get my like raw reaction to it with Solonin, and then like afterwards I was like, I should have stewed on that, and I'm not gonna do that again. I'm definitely whatever I get next, I'm gonna front end it because that was my learning experience. Yeah.
Do you have any more Solonin thoughts?
Solonin thoughts. I mean, a lot of them happened in the episode, I think, like, as we were talking about, I was like, oh, yeah, it is crazy to reflect on stuff. I think I've more than anything, it really has made me reflect on my, like, my kind of cope attitude that I have towards, like, work. Like, I feel like I accept a lot of bullshit, basically, and it's like, I've been, it made me think, like, just try to pick stuff apart in my head of, like, is this cope? Is this being mature and like accepting reality? Like,
Right.
That kind of stuff. I think this will inform. I think that discussion will inform stuff that I want to talk about in the future because it got me ticking a lot. So
Very exciting.
Probably will be revisiting that at some point. How's the Undertale genocide run?
I try like every 3 days to beat Undyne, and I have not done it, but I've not uninstalled it, so I'm still determined to do so.
The battle with Undyne continues.
Continues, yes. I'm glad you asked because it's still going.
You're like a Minecraft character with the arrows, like just with like spears sticking out of you.
Yes, I'm getting worse is also the problem. Like the less I'm like, I really need to sit down and fight Undyne for like 3 hours, but instead I'm just like chipping away at it and not getting any better because I'm not actually practicing and I'm playing other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for asking. The genocide route continues.
The murder of innocents. See, Milo would put stars in your name for doing the genocide route.
Yes, absolutely. We talked about on the Undertale episode, like people who would judge you for what you did in a video game. That that ties in well with what happens next.
Yeah,
and also
I feel
nobody
it a
leaves.
Little bit. I'm not as far away from Milo as I could be.
Mm-hmm.
This is my thought that I have sometimes when I read the comic. I'm like, you're watching this guy have a meltdown. You're like, I could be more different than this than I am.
Right. I felt that way even too, but probably not to the same extent. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
Different ways, yeah. It's a very human comic for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very,
Yeah.
defensive reactions. Everyone has them. I think it's about time that you tell me what happens next in our podcast.
Yes, indeed. Well, we've done an anime. We've done a video game. We've done a webcomic and a manga. I messed up the order, but ignore that. I was thinking...
Cut, we gotta redo it.
No. We're doing it live. Okay. One take. So basically I have like 3 routes, right? I could do a TV show, but I'm not really... There's nothing I'm like crazy about right now. I could do music, or I could do a movie. I think I'm gonna go easy on you in some ways. I'm gonna do a movie. Let me take you back to 2023. Yeah. Rewind noises.
I'm there.
You're there. It's 2023. Sam's bored. Sam goes to the movies like every week. I got really into the habit of going to the movies by myself, which you can have opinions on. I'm sure people do. And it's like 10 p.m. and I want to go to a movie. It's only like a Tuesday night. And I go see whatever's playing. And what's playing has become a major obsession for me in the last 2 years. Sometimes you watch something that just gets stuck in your head and doesn't go away. And for me, it is a movie that is like 40 years old, about a band I don't care about, by a director I've barely watched. Mallory, next week, Stop Making Sense.
Ooh.
A concert film about the Talking Heads.
This is heavy.
It is heavy.
I have baggage with the Talking
Things
Heads.
Mallory doesn't like. Old shit.
British people.
They're not British.
Are they not?
No, they're not British.
American people.
Rock music.
I'm half British and half American, so that's why I'm allowed to rag on both.
Yes. I'm putting you in my before you read.
Before do not follow if you are British American.
But no, yeah, we're going boomer core next week. We're going rock music from the 70s and 80s in a movie. I can't even explain why this movie means so much to me, so I am going to make you watch it in the spirit of this podcast.
It's crazy. I feel like this is about as opposite from a webcomic about gay
Yes, it
trans
is.
people as you could get.
We are going
It's about
normie as hell.
you're like I need a little bit of a refresher. Like we've been in the mines. I need to get a little bit more.
Yes. That being said,
Yeah.
I don't want to sell Talking Heads short, but we'll get into that next week.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna trash talk them completely. This will be good for me. This is me unpacking my baggage and getting over it and accepting the Talking Heads into my life.
Of not liking our parents' generation of music.
It's just my dad. This is just the kind of stuff my dad was into, where it's like, oh, I don't know, man. But we'll see. We'll see.
I'm gonna put you to the test.
I get the Talking Heads confused with like a few bands, I think, as well. So I could be like lumping them together in a way. So maybe they're the good one.
I knew nothing about them prior to this movie, other than Once in a Lifetime, a song I do not really like. And
Once in a Lifetime. Okay,
yes.
That's the most baggage I have of any song that my dad ever liked. So
you and I may agree on some things.
Let's go.
I have both become a Talking Heads fan, and I've also become a cringy Talking Heads fan of like their popular stuff's not even that good, but also this is
you
like
may
the peak
find
of
yourself on a podcast with your friend.
And you may ask yourself, how did I get here?
My God.
All right, same time next week. Good evening,
Same time
Mallory.
next week. Have a good day, Sam.
Have a good night, Mallory.